Welcome to Get the Facts, the program that provides you with information on government's policies and initiatives. I'm Theodore Henry. With advancements in the use of digital technology and the need to gather and store personal information, it has become imperative to enforce a system to protect databases. The Data Protection Act 2020 was crafted by the government to ensure compliance with regulations on the matter. To provide an update on this process is Celia Barclay, Information Commissioner at the Office of the Information Commissioner. Welcome to the program, Ms. Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Henry.
All right.
Here.
Let's jump right into getting some facts. I need you to give us an overview. Just give us a sense of the Data Protection Act in terms of its significance, and then we can perhaps talk about compliance. But why is this significant? Let's start there.
The Data Protection Act is monumental.
All right.
It is a true mark of progress for Jamaica as a nation.
Right.
We have watched as other countries all over the world have implemented their own legislation to protect the privacy of personal information. We have now come on board following that same trend.
Right.
And we recognize that this is critical for two reasons. One, it allows us to protect our citizens and persons who are visiting with us, because it also covers the information of tourists. But additionally, it places us in a position to be able to properly negotiate in terms of investments in the country. Where we are at now, everybody is looking to see how protected their people will be in doing business with your organizations.
Right.
And so in moving towards having its own data protection regime, Jamaica has signaled to the world that we are right there with you. We share this concern, and we are taking steps to ensure that our people and your people are protected.
Can we say Jamaica is open for business?
Jamaica is open for business.
I love the sound of that. So tell me, what kind of entities or professionals are required to adhere to these standards?
So essentially, the Act seeks to protect personal information that is collected for the purpose of doing business.
Right.
So any individual or corporate entity or even public authorities that are collecting persons' personal data for the purposes of offering a product or offering a service or monitoring the behavior of individuals in any way are considered data controllers and are to be regulated by this Act. And so the Act calls upon them to register with the OIC.
And, most times when people think data protection, they think just about, okay, you are an e-commerce entity, you have people's credit card on file, but your definition seems to go beyond that, once it's people's data.
So the Act covers personal data and it defines it. Personal data is any information by which an individual can be specifically identified.
Okay.
And so it's not just your financial information. It starts from the very basics, your name, your address, your phone number. You're using a computer, it includes your IP address, your TRN, your passport number. But then it also gets to things that are very unique to you. So when you talk about your DNA, your biometrics, or even certain personal characteristics, political affiliations, your association with organizations, whether religious or social, all these things which taken together, somebody can use to know that, okay, this is Mr. Henry. That's covered and protected by this Act.
All right, and anyone who gathers either all this data or subsets of this data, this Act applies to them.
If you're holding it and processing it for the purposes of offering a good or service or monitoring person's behavior.
Right. Oh, okay. Wow. Now, tell me, the Act is in effect.
Yes.
So what happens now? What do people need to do now? I'm a data controller.
All right. So we first brought certain sections in effect in 2021. Those were to allow for the setup of the Office of the Information Commissioner as a regulatory authority. As of last Friday, being December 1, 2023, the 2-year transitional period came to an end, and consequent on that, additional sections were brought in, which firstly provide for certain rights for data subjects, the persons to whom the information relates.
Yes.
It imposes certain obligations on data controllers, and that includes the obligations to protect the rights of the individuals as well as comply to certain standards.
Okay.
So now that the Act is in effect, controllers are required to register with the OIC so that we can have an idea as to who is processing this information, the types of information that they hold, and also to have an idea as to what are the mechanisms in place that will allow them to properly protect the information. In addition to that, data controllers have to put systems in place that will allow them to do certain things. So under this Act, the individuals whose information you hold do have a right to know, for example, what information you hold for them, how you are processing it.
Okay.
If it is that you are disclosing this information to anybody else, they have a right to know who you're disclosing this information to.
Right.
And so you, as the controller, as the business or the person, will now need to know, how am I going to provide that information to the person? You have to have your procedures in place to do that. But additionally, because we know what the risks are in terms of you processing people's information, you also have to have systems in place to make sure that in the event that anything happens, if there is a breach or a contravention, if somebody's information is compromised, that not only do you have mechanisms in place to allow you to notify those persons very quickly, but also for you to notify us as the regulator so that we can assist you in dealing with the situation.
Right, recovery processes as well, I would assume.
Right.
Okay, okay. I want to ask you about what happens with those who don't register, but we're going to go to a break right now, so please don't go anywhere. We're talking about data protection. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Get the Facts. We are discussing data protection and the measures being taken by the government to ensure all relevant parties become compliant with the Data Protection Act. The conversation continues with Information Commissioner at the Office of the Information Commissioner, Celia Barclay. Ms. Barclay, we were discussing what happens now that the Act is in effect. Right, and we had spoken about registration. You had given us an excellent breakdown of what needs to be in place with data controllers. We are curious, though, if you don't register, what happens?
Well, firstly, we would like to encourage registration. Registration is going to allow you, first of all, to be on our radar in terms of possible enforcement, but more than that, it allows us to know in terms of who is processing personal data. Right. And so where persons don't register, you have to recognize that this can come to our attention in various ways. So, for example, we are living in a society where citizens are increasingly vigilant. Even prior to this Act taking effect, we have had persons call in to say that I'm aware of this particular entity or that particular entity having my information and I have concerns. So it is best if persons come forward and register. If they don't, however, then once we are aware of the business operating, once we are aware of the data processing activities, then of course we will be reaching out to you to ensure that you step forward and come and register with the office.
Understood. I am very curious, does the office provide any sort of support to data processors in terms of best practices or that sort of thing?
So one of our roles as a regulatory authority is to provide guidance in terms of how persons can best comply with the Data Protection Act. So over time, we will be issuing guidance on different topics that will assist persons in knowing what applies to them, how it applies to them, steps that they can take in order to avoid pitfalls in terms of breaches, as well as to ensure best compliance with the different provisions under the legislation.
Happy to hear it. We've been talking about registration a lot, and would you take us through the steps to registration? All
right. So essentially the registration is broken down as a two-step process.
Right.
Firstly, we ask that persons create an account. Now, just to be clear, the registration will only take place via the office's website.
Right.
So our website has gone live. It's oic.gov.jm, and on that website, persons will see a My OIC portal, On that portal, it allows you to create an account as a data controller. To create the account, you only enter very basic information in terms of name, contact number, email. That will then give you access credentials that will take you to the registration form.
Right.
And in that form, individuals will be able to enter what is called in the Act their registration particulars. This is where now you would be giving us information such as the details of the business. If you have a data protection representative, then you would also have details as to that person. Those controllers that are required to appoint a data protection officer would also provide the officer's details. And then it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of asking you to enter information related specifically to the processing activities and measures that you may have in place to protect it. So it does take some time for the application to be completed, but for that reason, we have developed it to allow for time for completion. So persons don't have to worry about logging on and having to enter all the information and submit it in one go. If it is that you find that there is some information that you don't have readily on hand, then you will have an opportunity to go and put together that information, come back to the application form, enter it before submitting.
Sounds wonderful. We've heard about a phased compliance period of about 6 months. Could you talk to us a bit about that? How should businesses and professionals be operating in this period?
All right. So initially it was contemplated that all the remaining sections of the Act would have been brought into effect on December 1, 2023.
Yeah.
However, in the 2-year transitional period, we recognize that persons have not reached the level of readiness that we would have liked. And so what we have sought to do is arrive at a compromise where we would allow persons a longer opportunity in order to get ready for compliance. And so over the 6 months period, there will be no imposition of penalties. We have not brought the offenses into operation for the most part. And so that period will allow data controllers an opportunity now to take steps that they weren't able to complete within the period that was prior to the implementation of the Act. Now what we expect is that persons will seize the opportunity. So we recognize, for example, that there was a challenge in terms of organizations being able to identify data protection officers. Over the next 6 months period, what we expect to see is more persons entering the market, because we recognize that there was a shortage of individuals offering that service. There have been various both private and public sector entities that have started offering training programs to train persons in the area of data protection. And so there will be a greater market of persons that businesses and other controllers can look to for assistance in complying with the Act. We'll also, as a regulatory authority, during this period, be disseminating a lot more information as it relates to data protection, providing guidance to clarify some of the areas in the legislation that might not be as clear for the ordinary person to understand. Because we do recognize as well that there is a bit of an information gap in relation to the data protection. So we'll be taking steps as well to cure that gap, in addition to more persons being made available to assist.
Okay. So what about the partnership and the engagement with the private and public sector? How has that been going?
That has been very good, and we are looking forward to greater partnerships as we go forward. So over the past 2 years, we have had the opportunity to work with various persons in both private and public sector. The public sector, mainly in terms of operationalizing the office. We have gotten support from several other government entities with our build-out. But as it relates to the private sector, we have, for example, the private sector organization of Jamaica that has joined with us on several events in terms of assisting with the dissemination of information to the public. We also have the private practitioners, data privacy specialists that have worked with us in terms of sensitization sessions, assisting in putting on their own sessions, inviting us, or we have sessions and invite them, and they have been there from the very first day and to date in terms of assisting with both disseminating information as well as even going into organizations and providing that direct one-on-one assistance to them in building out their data protection program. So it has been very good, and we continue to encourage that kind of collaborative approach as between us and the private and public sector.
Sounds great, sounds great. We're almost out of time. In fact, we only have a few seconds left. Is there anything you'd like to say to our audience, many of whom, I assure you, are data controllers watching this program?
Embrace the change. Data protection, and certainly the Data Protection Act, is not something to be fearful of. We appreciate that in anything that requires compliance, and particularly where we know that there are certain penalties for non-compliance, there is a bit of anxiety and concern among persons. However, appreciate that this is a tool. It is something that persons can actually use to build trust and confidence even in their own organizations. Your customers are looking to see what you have in place to protect their data, to know who to do business with. So compliance is something that persons should be excited about, and certainly we are here to help, and so are others. Reach out.
That's the word, reach out. We've been talking about data protection, and what a monumental moment this is in Jamaica's history. This has been Get the Facts, and our guest was Information Commissioner at the Office of the Information Commissioner, Celia Barclay. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'm Theodore Henry. Take good care.